The most important thing for you to know about Matan is that he is a deeply soulful, profoundly decent, and incredibly kind human being. And every single day that you have been in our community, you have made our community better. And it's an absolute joy and honor to daven with you, to call you a friend, and to have you as a beloved member of our community. And we're absolutely thrilled to have you as our teacher of Torah this morning. So I introduce to you Matan Koch.
You may notice I'm slowly getting taller. For those of you in the audience who wish you had that capability, well, there have to be a few perks, right? All right, hopefully I've reached a height at which the camera can see me. That's what the goal was. And I want to wish you all Shabbat Shalom. Thanks, got it back even. It's exciting to be here for Disability Shabbat. And yet, for some of us, every Shabbat is Disability Shabbat. You know, I really became particularly aware of this in my later college years when I started to enjoy not only going to Hillel, but to Shabbos dinners hosted by my friends. Then, as now, I got around in a power wheelchair, and back then, New Haven, Connecticut was not a particularly accessible place. So for me, going to Shabbos dinner usually meant being carried into Shabbos dinner. And there's one Friday night where this became such a central issue and made such a powerful memory that it's still with me today and is where we're going to start. I had ridden my wheelchair to a friend's place where the only way into the house was via a staircase. We knew this, so two friends were there preparing to carry me in, two observant Jews. And then as they were about to, one of them paused, gave the other a very serious look and said, "Do we think this distance is more than 4 amot?" Now, for those who don't know, traditional Jewish law prohibits carrying anything or anyone that can't move on their own a distance of more than 4 amot or cubits on Shabbat. And so in many communities, nobody carries anything more than a few yards lest they run afoul of this. And the most common way around it is an eruv, but that is something that turn of the century New Haven did not have. So there we were. My friends were both leaders of the Orthodox community on campus. They took their Jewish legal obligations pretty seriously. So while I sat there on the lawn, there was this long silence. And I kind of wondered if one of them was about to pull out a tape measure and start, assuming what the distance was going to be. And then the other friend looked at the first one and he said, "Come on, this is Matan." And they proceeded to carry me inside. Now, one might be tempted to think that this is a case of two young men putting friendship over law, but in fact, Jewish law is very clear that the legal obligation to ensure that I could join my community in Shabbat dinner has at least as much weight as the competing law. Choosing not to measure, ironically, was a way of saying we're not going to put these two rules in conflict because we don't know by looking if it's really 4 amot or not, so let's not find out. And therefore, let's not be in conflict. So I share this story to remind us on this Disability Shabbat that disability has been a part of Jewish discussion since the beginning, and in fact, our ancient rabbis wrestled with this and made these same types of decisions when it came to how they were going to deal with folks with disabilities. There's a Talmudic discussion about the Kohanim, the priests in the ancient temple in Jerusalem, and many of you probably know a little bit about Talmud. And at least you might know the Talmud is made up of Mishnah and Gemara. The Mishnah, one of the earliest codifications of Jewish law, in this case, tells us in one stark sentence that if a priest's hands are malformed in some way, then he is prohibited from raising his hands to deliver Birkat Kohanim, the priestly blessing, to the congregation. Now, I was a young teenage undergrad when I learned this in a Mishnah seminar, and I was quite taken aback. I couldn't believe that my religious tradition would exclude people like me from such a basic religious role. And so I decided in my seminar paper for the class to look at the Gemara, the Talmudic discussion of the passage, for a better understanding. And first the rabbis explained it. The concern was that it would be distracting for the people who are blessed. It's a holy ritual, and you're not supposed to look at the Kohen's hands. You're supposed to be focused on the benediction. But maybe if someone's hands don't look the way most people's hands look, the congregants would be distracted. The rabbis in the Talmud, however, were no more interested in leaving it there than I was. As rabbis do, they argued with each other and they started telling stories. And one said, well, we know you're not supposed to do the blessing if the priest has runny eyes, but there was this one guy in this one town and he had runny eyes and he did the benediction, and they brought up some other ones too. What if a priest has a strange accent, making the prayers hard to understand? Well, if the congregation is accustomed to the accent, no problem. And what if the priest's hands are discolored? That could be distracting, but also there's an exception. If it's a town where lots of people work in the local dye factory and they're accustomed to seeing people with stained hands, well, that's fine, say the rabbis. In essence, the rabbis did what my friends did, replacing the stark legalism of the Mishnah with an exploration of the individual. Distraction is still a problem, but not for the people who had, in fact, become accustomed to those things that might otherwise be distracting. My friends couldn't carry me more than 4 amot, but what if we're just carrying a friend without measuring to the last centimeter? Something to think about while I turn the page. In essence, the rabbis really go so far as to require communities to bring themselves to a place where people with disabilities can perform the sacred tasks that they would do. The phrase the Talmud uses repeatedly for these people, for us, the guy with the runny eyes and the people with dye on their hands and the funny accent fella, is Dash Ba'iro, known in their city. They were familiar figures in their town. They weren't considered the other. Given that there's little or nothing that a person can do to make themselves known or familiar if they're not first embraced, I've always read this as putting an onus on the community to allow as broad a spectrum of individuals as possible to become known and familiar. It falls to us to make them an integral part of our community just like everybody else. Here's the point. The rabbis of the Talmud understood human nature very well. They're saying, look, you may find yourself praying in a place with people who look differently, act differently, or whose bodies operate differently from yours. They don't say pretend you're not distracted. What they're saying is get yourself to a place, do the work where this becomes a part of your reality. We don't get there just by deciding, I'm totally comfortable with everyone who's different than me. We actually have to work on it. We have to do what civil rights activist Brian Stevenson calls getting proximate. We have to get to know each other. That's how we expand our definition of what it means to be one of us. Sometimes, however, it's not just attitude. Sometimes inclusion and accessibility require expansive and creative thinking. For many years, I was a disability consultant to Jewish organizations. I once worked with a synagogue that very much wanted to be accessible, but couldn't afford the expensive renovations to allow access to their raised bima. They were brainstorming all kinds of ways to make the raised pulpit more accessible for people with disabilities. So finally I said, why don't you just get rid of it? Just don't have a raised bima. Put the rabbi, the cantor, the people leading services on the same level as everyone else. They said, can we do that? I said, of course you can. I researched it. The raised platform isn't required by Jewish law, but a practice that we adopted from Christian church design in the Middle Ages, the raised basilica of Christian churches. Here at IKAR, we are engaged in envisioning and planning and developing a new campus. And I would humbly suggest that we use that kind of thinking in every aspect of the planning. Accessibility and inclusion shouldn't be afterthoughts. They are integral Jewish values. Let us think expansively about who we are, who makes up our community. Let's make our community and everything, and I bolded this so you can hear the bolding in my voice, and everything our community does as accessible and inclusive as possible as my pages fall down. This means wheelchair access. It means sound systems that make services more accessible for people who are hard of hearing. It means quiet, calm spaces for neurodivergent folks, and so much more. And it's not about compassion. Compassion's nice, but inclusion is about something much bigger in this context, and it stems from an idea we can find in this week's Parsha, in Parashat Bereshit, where we read, Vayivra Elohim et ha'adam b'tzelmo b'tzelem Elohim bara oto. Basically, that God created human beings in God's own image. Now, as a young kid, I kind of wondered, if everyone is so different, how could this be? How could we all be created in God's image? At the time, I was told, don't take it literally. It's about values. It's about virtues. This may indeed be true, but anyone who has studied Talmud can also say that there are times when the rabbis took it very literally. And I think that that is valuable here. And when you do that, the only idea that makes sense is that God is so much bigger than any of us, that we are all facets of the image of God, and that the image of God can only be reflected in the totality of humanity. Thus, if we're building a place for God to dwell among us, which is the ideal that we try to emulate in our houses of worship, any facet of a human being to which our place is not accessible is a part of God that cannot be reflected and to dwell there. Think about that. It's really as if we are excluding part of the very being that we are inviting with the space. And if that weren't enough, you don't know what part of the magnificent presence it is that you're missing out on when someone can't get in. Look at your favorite person. Just look around. Pick them out. Imagine a circumstance where something kept them from coming to IKAR whenever it was that they were first going to come and be a part of our community, which could range from a schedule conflict to an ex-esper, who knows, and for some reason they found somewhere else to make their Jewish home before you ever met them. Not only would you not know them and have all the wonderful experiences and memories that you have with them, you'd have absolutely no idea what you were missing. So the lesson of disability Shabbat, from my perspective, should be an insatiable desire to let in more humanity and thus more of the divine into our community. Compassion is a virtue, but I find that enlightened self-interest is an excellent motivator to action. So as a closing intention, I offer this. Every time you're looking for one more participant, one more volunteer, one more Torah reader, think about who is excluded from our community by disability or any other reason, and think about how we would be enriched if only they were here. Then let that motivate us to create an inclusive community that truly lets everyone in. Shabbat Shalom.